Hello, beautiful souls. This is Atul Krishnadas, and I am going to be your host today. Welcome back to another Ashram Talks session. And today we will continue with chapter 4 of the Bhagavad Gita, talking about transcendental knowledge. In past sessions, we talked a little bit about the difference between Krishna and our eternal soul. And today, the transcendental knowledge that Krishna is imparting is about his own nature. We will explore a little bit more about who Krishna is and the relationship with us, with every single soul in this universe. And the person who is going to be guiding us today is going to be Abhimanyu Wolf. Hello, Abhimanyu. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hare Krishna, Atul Krishna Prabhu. Thank you so much for hosting me here. I'm very glad to be here and to um, introduce today's topic. I'll offer some prayers to our spiritual preceptors, to Sri Krishna, so that we can have an auspicious and enlivening discussion. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalang Shri Gurun Vaishnavangscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tang Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitangscha Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanang Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Shri Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Offering my obeisances to all the spiritual masters in our line, to Sri Krishna and to Sri Arjuna for having this amazing discussion of Bhagavad Gita. I'm praying for their blessings so that we can remember them, so we can remember their teachings in a way that's going to uplift our hearts and spirits. And so today Sri Krishna is on this transcendental discussion. He's telling Arjuna all about his transcendental divine form. And so it's the 4th chapter, verse 6 of the Gita. Shri Krishna says, Ajopi san avyayatma, bhutanam ishvaropi san, prakriting svamadhishtaya, sambhavam yatma mayaya. Although I am unborn, and my transcendental body never deteriorates, and although I am the Lord of all sentient beings, I still appear in every millennium in my original transcendental form. And so I was curious and fascinated when the option came to choose this verse, because a lot of what we discussed in the Gita so far has much to do with our direct experience, just as living entities. We're kind of going through this world, we're going through the hard struggle for existence, as Srila Prabhupada calls it. And Sri Krishna, throughout the Bhagavad Gita, each chapter, he talks about different types of yoga. Even some commentators on the Gita, they refer to chapter 1 as, I think it's called Vishad Yoga, the yoga of lamentation. That Arjuna, he really just he just started lamenting his condition. He started feeling compassion for all, not only those who would be killed on the battlefield, but for their families, for their wives, for their children. Well, if all the, basically, if so many of the strong men of society are killed, who's going to be there to protect the women? How could I possibly fight against those, my teachers, grandfathers, father figures, brothers, nephews, uncles? How could I possibly fight against such people? And so Arjuna, he just, through this lamentation, he came to the point where he finally said, I'm not able to figure this out anymore. Krishna, I accept you as my, not just as my friend, but as my spiritual master. Please instruct me. And so Sri Krishna, he began to talk to Arjuna about how, you're not this body. You're an eternal spiritual being. There never was there a time when you did not exist, nor I, nor all of these kings, and never is there a time where we shall cease to be. Krishna, he started talking about this basic fundamental knowledge of the soul as distinct from the body. He talked about, he talked about the qualities of a saintly person. He talked about developing the higher taste. So Krishna, he's been talking about, different types of yoga, karma yoga, jnana yoga, offering the fruits of one's actions for the pleasure of Sri Krishna, as a sense of sacrifice to the divine. So Krishna, thus far, a lot of what we've been talking about, Krishna has been discussing, he's been discussing our practice. What do we need to do as spiritual practitioners? How do we need to see ourselves? And how do we need to change our mentality? And so in this verse, Krishna, he's not, at least in a direct sense, he's not talking about us living entities. Now he's talking about himself, because Arjuna asked, well, how is it, a few verses ago, he asked, how could you possibly have spoken this Gita to the sun god when the sun god was born millions of years ago and you're my age? And Krishna said, no, many births you and I have taken, but I remember them all, whereas you do not. And so now Sri Krishna, he's talking about himself. And so the need for us as bhakti yogis, as practitioners on the path of bhakti, the need for us to really deeply understand Krishna, is that first there comes what's called sambandha or sambandha gyan. It's basically understanding. The word sambandha literally means relationship. So it's the knowledge of relationships. And what is that? That's the relationship between myself and the divine. Who is the divine? Who am I? And in order to know our relationship, we have to know in detail, well, who are we? Also, it means understanding the relationship between ourselves and this world. What connection do we spiritual living entities have with this material world? And also understanding the relationship between Krishna and this material world. What relationship does Krishna, does the divine, the supreme, have with this, temporary material world? First, we have to understand these things in order to, and then once this sambandha gyan, or this knowledge of fundamental truths, of the relationship between these fundamental truths, once this is understood, at least to some basic extent, then we can start to engage in what's called abhideya or sadhana, basically a spiritual practice. Once we have the basic spiritual understanding in place, and the nature of that spiritual practice is that sadhana or practice is aimed at a sadhya or an ultimate goal. And so for the bhakti yogi, the sambandha is in, and I'm talking in very basic sense, the sambandha is that I'm not of this material world. Essentially, the spirit does not belong to this material world. We're not truly at home here. We are of Krishna. We are inherently servants of the divine. We're parts and parcels, or servants of that divine being, Sri Krishna, that supreme friend of ours. And that Sri Krishna, his relationship with the material world is that he's, you could say, untouched by material nature. He's the Lord of it. And he descends in this material world ultimately to give us a chance to know about him. If he didn't descend to this world, we wouldn't have his conversation with Arjuna at the crux of such a crucial battle of the Mahabharata. And so that's why Krishna, he stresses that in this verse. So this verse would be one talking more about Sambandha, Krishna helping us understand who is he, because if we're going to talk about our relationship with the divine, we have to start to know, well, who is that divine being? And so Krishna, he's saying, although I'm unborn, so he's saying that he doesn't have an origin in time. He doesn't have an origin, so to speak. He is his own. He is his own. What was it? Svashraya Ashraya. He is his own shelter. He is the cause of all causes. And he said, my transcendental body never deteriorates. Srila Prabhupada makes the point that at the time of this Mahabharata war, Krishna, he had grandchildren. He was, quite aged by material calculations, but there's never any description or depiction of Krishna having, long white hair or being aged or wrinkly or anything like that. He basically, it was seen at that time that his body just stopped aging at around 20, even though he stayed in his manifest presence in the material world was, if I remember right, for 125 years. So Krishna, he's telling us what we need to know about him in order to begin developing, some desire to associate with him, to serve him, to have our relationship with him. As actually, as is going to be discussed in just a few verses from now, Vitaraga Bhaya Krodha Manmaya Mamupashrita Bahavo Jnana Tapasa Putamad Bhagavam Agata. Sri Krishna said that those who give up all attachment, fear, and anger, and who really take shelter of me. And how is it they take shelter of me? Bahavo Jnana Tapasa, that they cultivate knowledge about me. They really come to know me. Ultimately, when we're, oftentimes what may lead a person to fall in love is that, either they meet a person directly, they know more about them and they become very enamored, or sometimes that process of falling in love can happen just by hearing about a person. Prior to the Mahabharata war being fought, there was one princess. Her name was Rukmini. I'm trying to remember which kingdom she was from. This princess Rukmini, she was her, due to some political intrigue, her parents were going to marry her to, sort of wicked-minded prince named Shishupal. He was actually, this Shishupal, ironically, was a cousin of Krishna, but he had a very envious nature, and so Rukmini, she, and it was actually her brother Rukmi. He was, I believe, he was friends with Shishupal. He wanted her to marry him, and she did not want this arrangement, and so there was, there were people who would come to the palace and they would tell her about Krishna, and so she hadn't even met Krishna yet, but she kept hearing about his, his divine nature, his divine form, his divine pastimes. She kept hearing about his wonderful activities, and so even without ever once laying eyes on him, just by hearing about him, she fell in love, and she sent letters to him saying, Krishna, you have to come rescue me. You have to come and take me as your bride. So she wrote those letters, and just with full faith and surrender, she, you know, put her life in his hands more or less. And then Krishna very heroically went, kidnapped her on the day of what would have been her wedding, and he accepted her as his own bride. And so this all happened just by hearing about Krishna, just by hearing about who he is. And so the Bhagavad Gita, it's, you could say it's Krishna's first love letter to us. He's telling and this time it's he himself directly telling us. And in some cases, again with Rukmini, I should say Rukmini Devi, she had heard about Krishna from others, and so then she, developed the determination that she must live her life with him. In this case, the Bhagavad Gita, it's Krishna's direct love letter to us, that he descends personally to this world with his associates, with his abode, just to, what at least one of the main purposes is that he displays his wondrous activities to enamor us, to give us the chance to get to know him, to get to become intrigued by him. And in this case, again, he's not just displaying his activities, but now he's directly telling us about him. And so he's saying, I'm unborn, my transcendental body never deteriorates. Ah, yes, so this is the connection I was making with chapter 4, verse 10, that's coming up in a few verses, that, yeah, Srila Prabhupada, he describes there that a lot of what, leads to a sense of frustration and voidism in this world is that, we sort of, we have a negligence of spiritual life and a fear of an eternal individual personality, both the idea that I'm eternally going to be a person, that even after liberation, I'm still going to retain my individuality, I'm going to be fully conscious and personal. Sometimes that can be a scary thought, because being fully conscious in this material world entails being conscious of our suffering, being conscious of our own character defects, being conscious of the temporary and difficult nature of this world, and being conscious of, the faulty nature of this body. And so Srila Prabhupada, he explains that oftentimes, we would prefer an impersonal idea of liberation where there's no personal God and we don't eternally remain individuals, that we just merge into some kind of, you know, light or nothingness, because the thought that, well, I'm actually going to be a person with thoughts, feelings, wants, expectations, and even that God will have his own wants and feelings and expectations, or whatever it is. We start to imagine, okay, well, I know what personality and individuality looks like in this world, and so I don't want to face that in the eternal realm. So that sort of fear gets in the way of our spiritual lives. It gets in the way of our relationship with Krishna, and it can lead to a sense of frustration or voidism, where it's like, okay, well, I don't even want to pursue spiritual life at all. And so Sri Krishna, he's reassuring us, no, no, my transcendental body is not like that. It's not like this material body that grows old, that has diseases, that dies, then we have to give it up and accept a new body. It's not, we do have a body and a personality and individuality in the spiritual world, but it's not like we have here. Krishna, he's reassuring us, no, my transcendental body never deteriorates. And, you know, in terms of, encouraging us to take shelter of him, he says that, again, while I am the Lord of all sentient beings, I still appear in every millennium in my original transcendental form. So not only is my form in the eternal realm that you would relate with me, not only is that form eternal, and the form that, Krishna is assuring the living entity that, yes, in that eternal realm, as he says in the beginning of the Gita, I'm eternal, you're eternal, all the kings you see around us, they're eternal. Never was there a time where we did not exist. Never is there a time where we shall cease to be. And so again, this is Sambandha. Our relationship is Sanatan. If we're both eternal, then our relationship is eternal as well. And so not only is Krishna saying, not only is his form in that eternal realm, you know, imperishable, but he's saying that even when I descend to this material world, he's saying, Arjuna, even in this form that I'm speaking to you now, this is my original transcendental form. There's what's called Mayavad philosophy. There's a sort of misconception that when Krishna descends to this material world, that he takes a form of flesh. Even the word incarnation, well, sometimes our spiritual preceptors, they'll use this English word as a translation for the word avatar. If you really get into the deep meaning of the words, the word incarnation implies a form taken of flesh. I think karn, like carnivore. The word karn means flesh, and so this body, it's made of flesh. So the word incarnate it would imply, or at least it could imply, depending on who's reading it, that the Lord takes a form of flesh. But this is not the case. Krishna is saying, no, no, I still appear in every millennium in my original transcendental body, prakritim svamadishtaya sambhavami atmamayaya. And so the word avatar is from the Sanskrit word avatirna, that Krishna, it means to descend. It doesn't mean to assume a form. It doesn't mean to take a form made of flesh. It means ultimately that Krishna, in his original spiritual form, is descending to this world. So Krishna is assuring us. He's assuring Arjuna in this love letter that he's speaking to Arjuna, that all these wondrous activities of mine that you're hearing about, these are done in my original transcendental form, in my spiritual body. This is not, even if it's visible in the material world, these are not material activities. These are not stale things. That, no, this is everything that I'm doing, my transcendental form, my activities, my personality. These are all spiritual things that are ever fresh, and because it's imperishable. The spiritual nature of Krishna is that the more we hear about him, then the more we want to hear about him. I know my spiritual master, he stresses often that the you know the ideal result, the result we're looking for when discussing topics about Krishna, is that we want to hear it again. If the speaker is representing the divine message properly, and the hearer has the right submissive mood, the symptom we should be expecting is that I want to hear again. And the example he gives is that, you know, another of Sri Krishna's divine descents, Lord Chaitanya, he was hearing from his very close companion, Gadadhar Pandit. He was hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam from him. And there were two pastimes, the pastimes of the young boy Dhruva Maharaj and the pastime of the young boy Prahlad Maharaj. And their pastimes of of their pure devotion, of coming face to face with the Lord, with the divine. And after after each time, Lord Chaitanya said, "No, please tell me again. I want to hear it 100 times." And as far as I understand, he actually did hear each pastime 100 times from his friend. And so this, this is the nature that when Sri Krishna is being spoken about purely by a pure-minded speaker, and the listener is very submissive, then it becomes, just the topics of Krishna become such a relishable experience because, again, Sri Krishna, his form, it's transcendental, literally means cannot be calculated, and it's ever fresh. And so the nature of it is that we want to hear it again. There are, many. I remember even one saintly person in a very famous pilgrimage site called Radha Kund, the topmost of all spiritual sites of pilgrimage. Even though this saintly person, he was engaged in reading very highly esoteric literatures within the Bhakti Yoga tradition, literatures that maybe cannot be so readily shared in public settings, or at least the contents of them cannot. But he said, I've read this Bhagavad Gita 37 times, and I find something new every time that I did not see all those 37 times before. There's always something special and new in this Bhagavad Gita as it is. And so this is the nature of Krishna himself. And again, in the spiritual realm, there's no difference between the reference and the referent. There's no difference between the name of Krishna and Krishna himself. There's no difference between the topics about Krishna and Krishna himself. His abode, his associates, his transcendental activities, his name, his form, they are non-different from himself. I am different from my body. Eventually this body will age and I'll have to leave it behind, as I would leave behind any vehicle that stops working. But again, Krishna is saying, no, my body never deteriorates. And so Sri Krishna, he's reassuring us, I appear in every millennium in my original transcendental form. And so he's saying that by hearing about me, by getting to know me, then you'll come to me. In the coming verses, Krishna says, Janma karma chame divyam evang yo vitti tattvataha tyaktva deha punarjanma naiti mamiti sorjuna. Janma karma chame divyam. Krishna says, my janma, my birth, my karma, my activities, chame divyam. The word divya means divine. Evang yo vitti tattvata. If you understand these in deep truth, if you understand the nature of my birth and activities in truth, tyaktva deha punar janma, then you'll not have to take a birth again. And if you don't take birth in this world again, where will you go? Naiti mamiti sorjuna. That you won't have to take birth in the material world, and ultimately you'll ascend to the transcendental abode where once one goes there, one never has to return to this material world. And so Sri Krishna, he's kind of giving us the basic information we need to know that our relationship with him is eternal, and that just by hearing about him, gradually we'll develop a fascination that actually, even if I'm rehearing, whether it's the Bhagavad Gita, the Srimad Bhagavatam, certain pastimes of Krishna, like his lifting of Govardhan, or his entering into Mathura to kill Kuvalayapita and the wrestlers and Kamsa, whenever whatever pastime we're hearing of, Krishna is assuring us, no, these are ever fresh activities. Even these pastimes, they're eternally ongoing. It's not just historical events that are nice to remember, but everything that Krishna does, it's eternal. It is eternally being enacted in some realm. And another example of devotees who, again, they had just been hearing about Krishna and hearing about Krishna, that Sri Krishna, he was even his birth was very transcendental. He appeared in the jail cell of Mathura as his maternal uncle Kamsa, was holding his parents hostage because it was predicted that Krishna would kill Kamsa. So Krishna, he simultaneously appeared in the jail cell to Devaki and Vasudeva, and he took birth from the womb of Mother Yashoda. The Srimad Bhagavatam describes this simultaneous appearance. Again, Krishna doesn't appear like me or like any living entity. He has a divine appearance, and so he took his birth in the land of Vrindavan. And so the women of Mathura, that just as different merchants would go back and forth between Vrindavan and Mathura, they would just hear about Krishna and hear about Krishna. And so just by hearing about Krishna again and again, they developed such a fascination with him, such an attraction to him. And so when Krishna and Balaram and their friends finally went to Mathura for Krishna to have the face down with his uncle, with his maternal uncle Kamsa, to rescue his parents Devaki and Vasudev, the women of Mathura said, if I can remember it right, Gopyastapakhyamacharad yadamushyarupam lavanya sarama samordvam ananya siddham drigbi pibantyanusavan binavam durapam ekantadhama yashasa shri aishvarasya. The women of Mathura, again, because they had learned so much about Krishna, when they finally did get to see him in person, they were able to appreciate his beauty so much more. Again, by hearing about such a divine personality, one develops that sense of love, of eagerness to be with him. And so Krishna, he both, in this case, he's giving us the love letter himself, or in other cases, like with Rukmini Devi, with the women of Mathura, they were hearing about him through the grapevine, so to speak, and it built such a sense of intrigue about who is this wondrous personality, and who, again, by descending in this world and showing his pastimes, he's acting as our highest well wisher, as our most lovable friend. And so the ladies in Mathura, they said, we're seeing him now, and they said, Gopyastapa kim acharadyadam musharupam. How glorious are the cowherd women, the gopis of Vrindavan, that they get to behold this form every day, that lavanya sarama samorva mananya siddham. And again, because they had been hearing about him, about his divine activities, they knew that Krishna, he's not just a king, he's not just a mystic yogi, he's not even just a demigod, a presiding deity of a specific material element of this world. No, lavanya saram, that his loveliness is the essence, the only abode of all fame, of all beauty, of all opulence, and he's completely unparalleled and ananya siddham, that his beauty, his glories are just ever expanding, they're ever new. Durbi pibantyanu savabhinavam durapam, that they're thinking that how fortunate are his most dear devotees, that every day they're drinking the nectar of his beautiful form, and they're relishing it in an ever fresh way. They never think, oh, I saw him. Yeah, I remember, I remember how it was, and it's a little less interesting because, again, in this world, if we stare at the body, even for somebody who's gifted with remarkably good-looking features, eventually, the body sort of becomes stale. It becomes stale to look at. It doesn't have that newness of maybe when you first saw that person, you were just blown away by their facial features, by their bodily figure. But no matter how beautiful they are, if you stare at them again and again and again every day, you may still find them to be attractive, but there isn't that same newness like maybe the first time you had seen them. But they explain that no, Krishna, his original transcendental form, it's not like that. That it's ananya siddham, it's ever fresh, it's ever new, and his devotees who have that pure love for him, they experience his form as newer and newer at every moment. That each time it's astonishing. It's as if they had never seen him before, and so this is this is who Krishna is. This is our most lovable friend, and by hearing about him, it's said that from Bhakti Yoga Paribhavita Hrit Saroja Aseshu Tekshita Pato Nanunata Pungsam, that by from Bhakti, that the process of bhakti yoga, it starts by hearing about Krishna, and by hearing and hearing and hearing about Krishna, then he enters our heart through the path of our ears, and then in the core of our heart, then we start to see Krishna through the ears, so to speak. That divine sound vibration enters our ears, and then Sri Krishna's form, as our heart becomes purified, Sri Krishna's divine form starts to manifest in our heart, and we start to develop a deeper and deeper appreciation of the new and ever fresh divine form of Sri Krishna. So again, I've done my best to try and find the practicality of this verse, even though again, Sri Krishna, he's not directly saying this is how you perform karma yoga. He's not directly saying that this is this is the mentality you need to have towards this world. He's talking about himself. He's telling us directly about who he is, so that we can give up our fears about this is how I am in this world, and I've had some bad relationship experiences. Is it gonna be like that with Krishna? Shri Krishna, he's talking about himself to remove those doubts from our heart, so that we can really start to appreciate and learn about him with an open mind. And from deeply knowing someone comes the sense of love, and from that sense of love come the acts of love. And ultimately, bhakti yoga, it ultimately just boils down to that. It's acts of love for the divine. And so I think I will stop there for now and entertain any comments or questions anyone has.
Thank you very much, Abhimanyu. So I think this was a wonderful opportunity to reflect more about the nature of Sri Krishna. And we had here in the comments, Colleen, she mentioned that it's very reassuring to know that Krishna is always with us. So I think this verse is wonderful in the sense that he is reassuring that he is not only eternal, but he is always accompanying us, and he always descends in every millennium, to
Yes.
give every soul the opportunity to hear about him, to know about him, to have a relationship with him. It may not be like individually, physically with every single one of us, but he's giving us the opportunity to hear about his pastimes, about who he is, about his personality,
Yes.
to truly get to know more about him. And I think is wonderful what you mentioned that when if you want to have a relationship with Krishna, with God, and to truly love him, you need to know about him, right? And it is a wonderful invitation for every single one of us to cultivate that personal relationship with him, to get to know him, to see in our daily lives and struggles how Krishna is playing around with us, making a joke or trying to
Mm,
make us laugh or to pay attention to things that sometimes we just don't want to pay attention to, and that's
mm,
also love.
mm. Yes.
So I truly appreciate for you giving us this opportunity to reflect about our own relationship with God and our understanding of Krishna. Um, so yes, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. I don't see any more comments or questions today. I just want to invite everybody to join us one more time every Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. and every Thursday at 8 a.m.
Wait,
Thank you very
was it
much.
Monday? Was it Monday and Thursday or Tuesday and Thursday?
Oh, it's Monday and Thursday. You're absolutely right. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
Thank you so much, Abhimanyu, and thank you for being here with us today. Hare
Thank you,
Krishna.
Krishna Prabhu. Hare Krishna.